to our online training, Where to Focus Your CX Efforts. I'm Candace Thorson, Managing Editor at GovLoop, and today I'm also your moderator. So thank you so much for joining me. And I want to give a special thanks to Okta, Carahsoft, and Atlassian for sponsoring this session. So to get started, our conversation today is going to revolve around two related questions. How do you measure a good customer experience? And then on the flip side, how do you measure a bad one? More than a year ago, the president issued an executive order around improving government customer experience, or CX. And so that means that agencies have spent more than 365 days reassessing their CX strategies and making updates. But how do we know if those updates actually are working? So our experts today are going to share benchmarks that you can use to gauge your own agency CX efforts and tools to better meet those standards. I do have some housekeeping items to share first, so just bear with me for a few moments. If you're on Twitter, please share what you learned using the hashtag GLTrain. We have great resources available for you on the console, as always, so be sure to check those out. If you want to access our closed captioning feature, just look for the icon that's on the bottom right-hand side of your media player. We don't want you to have technical problems, but things do happen. So if you have a problem, just send a message through the Ask a Question tab, and my colleague Maddie will help you out. You also can use that same tab to submit questions to our speakers, and we want your questions, so don't hesitate. And you can engage with your fellow attendees by launching the chat feature that we also have available. And finally, we're recording this training, so tomorrow check your inbox because we're going to send you a link to the entire session on demand. So now that that's out of the way, I want to introduce our speakers. We have Evan Albert. He is Director of Measurement and Data Analytics with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Matt Carter, Senior SIAM Specialist with Okta, and Ben Straub, who's Head of Public Sector at Atlassian. So I just want to thank you all so much for being here. And I want to lay the groundwork, and I'll start with you, Evan, if that's okay. How do you measure a good customer experience or a bad one?
Well, in our case, in the Department of Veterans Affairs, we measure customer experience from the perspective of veteran experiences, either in healthcare, benefits, or memorial services by means of an extensive survey ecosystem that we have deployed using a Medallia-based system platform that we have nicknamed V-Signals, or Veteran Signals. We have a very detailed measurement system in which we send out surveys to veteran participants in any number of different, who have had any number of different experiences across the enterprise. We have a very detailed process by which we glean the identities of those who have had different programs and services in healthcare over the span of a given 2-week time frame, and identify, using a statistical sample plan, a subset of those total number of veteran participants in those programs, and send out surveys to them in which an initial welcome email is sent to them, inviting them to complete the survey. And then after a week, if a response has not been submitted, we send out a reminder email. The responses come into that V-Signals, or Veteran Signals, Medallia-based platform in real time. The results are available immediately, and by means of dashboards with very advanced, comprehensive filters and tabs and analytic capabilities, we're able to slice and dice the data to find out what dimensions of customer experience in those different particular programs and services and healthcare are working for the veterans successfully, and where the pain points are. And we're able to analyze all that by time frame of when the programs and services were delivered. We're able to look at location where they were delivered, able to analyze the data by demographics and any number of different characteristics, just depending on what the customer needs and wants.
That's great. And how long have you been sending out the surveys? Like, have you been ramping it up?
2017, I believe.
2017. I love
we
that.
We have about 9 or 10 million survey responses under management.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Matt, do you have anything to add to that? Like, do you have thoughts on what makes a good or a bad customer experience, or do you have an example to share?
Some of the key metrics that we focus on helping our agencies when using Okta are basically improving the percentage of churn during transactions like registration, identity proofing or validation, login, checkout. Just basically helping customers create that frictionless flow and knowing whether they're getting stuck along the way of either providing credentials or providing passwords or any sort of places within the flow that might cause dissatisfaction from the customer. One example we have is with a popular artificial intelligence provider. They recently scaled up to like 3,000 requests per second with over 80 million users. So we really encourage our customers to test using what they expect some of their peak performance times to be so that they know that customers' latency is going to be reasonable during those peak times. So they're not having that Taylor Swift concert ticket performance.
No, that is something you definitely don't want to replicate, right? Those are phenomenal numbers, though. I mean, we talk about data is growing exponentially. It's hard to wrap your mind around numbers that large. I really like that. Ben, do you have any thoughts on that or anything you want to add or any other thoughts? Or I have a lot of questions I can move on to too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I would add is making sure that, when you do identify those kind of friction points or places where folks are having some challenge, being able to get them help quickly, right? So having that service element behind it, I think does help, from an experience standpoint. Now, obviously, the measurement piece going kind of hand in hand with that. But yeah, I think, once you kind of get the data and understand where it is, but being able to quickly move and move it forward. So.
Yeah, and I think just as human beings, we all have a pretty good idea of what a bad customer experience is. So so that we all know intuitively what we don't want to happen. So Evan, I'll go back to you. How do you, in your mind, how do you measure CX's true impact on the community? In your case, veterans community, and then employees internally at the agency. So what are you seeing in the community, and like what's the impact for people in the VA?
The impact of our surveys is the ability to make quality and systems improvement at the local level. We have hundreds of medical facilities across the country that serve veterans. We have dozens and dozens of what we call regional offices that serve veterans for benefit services. There are dozens and dozens of national cemeteries in this country. The effectiveness and impact of our survey ecosystem is to take the survey results that we have and look at various domains. For example, we break down survey responses by what we call customer experience drivers, such as employee helpfulness, ease and simplicity, equity and transparency, which refers to whether the veteran feels that we have their best interest at heart when we're serving them. All kinds of different customer experience domains, and we're able to see in any given geographical area or for any specific category of services what the level and degree is of customer satisfaction and what we call trust, which is our net promoter score, the extent to which a veteran indicates that they are satisfied enough with the services and programs we're providing that they presumably will come back and visit us again. We're able to see the trust scores of those veterans, and if they're not as strong as we would like, we're able to cross-compare the trust scores, satisfaction scores, with other domains that they're commenting on. For example, if the score for overall trust tends to be a little lower, let's say a 2 out of 5, which is dissatisfied, and we're able to see that all the other categories of satisfaction, such as employee helpfulness or equity, transparency, or ease and simplicity, are relatively high, scored, for example, a 4 out of 5, which is satisfied, but yet there's one element that tends to be low, 1 or 2 out of 5, dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. We can reasonably assume that that particular respondent had a particularly negative or less than optimum experience on that particular domain, and that itself is what drove the overall trust score to be lower than expected or desired. And we can do that at the individual level, but we can also do that at the macro level. If you're a medical facility director in Minneapolis, you can specifically look at your results for a given time frame, either for a particular specialty class of care or a particular unit, medical unit where veterans were seen, and you're able to see the trends and emerging concerns or trending themes of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So the ultimate proof in the pudding for us are the trends that we see and how we can leverage those trends to make quality and systems improvement at the local level.
That's really impressive that you can drill down all the way like that. But I find it interesting that like trust is an option, and it's possible for someone to get relatively low score, VA to get a relatively low score from someone on trust, but do well on all the others. Because you'd think that if you had great employee interactions and service and stuff, that would build trust. So that's an interesting point. Matt, do you have anything to like what the impact in your mind on the community is, or how having good customer experience or trying to put these programs in place affects the people inside an agency that have to implement them? Because it's like there's a lot of stuff on the outside, but the back end is a lot more, I don't want to say frantic, but there's a lot more that happens that people don't know about.
I think when we do well collectively improving CX for citizens, I think we're building trust in public institutions at the macro level. At the agency level, I think I recommend looking at both quantitative and qualitative measures. I think it's easy for the folks in the SOC to look at their Kibana dashboards and see that they don't have a lot of errors on their thing and think we're good, and they're not really taking into account that people may not really like the user interface and they just don't feel comfortable using it. So I think that balance of the surveys that Evan talked about and looking at the data, it's really important to balance those two.
Right. Now, can any of you, either of you, several of you, whatever, just talk a little bit about the president's executive order and where, kind of touch on what it does a little bit, and then kind of where agencies are right now. I don't know, Evan, I don't mean to keep going back to you, but as far as what the VA, like how you guys have responded to it?
Yeah, the executive order was a big deal for the Department of Veterans Affairs. We're one of the governmental leaders and trendsetters, in my view, in terms of customer experience measurement and listening capabilities. And the executive order sort of codified the expectation and principal criticality of customer experience as a driving force in allowing government to enhance and improve services. And what I've seen by my own observations is that other government agencies, as a result of that executive order, are now starting to set up their own customer experience units and are now coming to the Department of Veterans Affairs and groups like mine who have been doing this for a while and are asking, what is your ecosystem, Evan, for setting up a customer experience measurement system? And in our case, that involves both qualitative as well as quantitative systems. So qualitative would be focus groups and interviews that are all included in something called human-centered design. Before you can start measuring customer experience, you need to understand what are the driving forces that are important for, in our case, a veteran when they receive programs or services or healthcare. We call those moments that matter. And those are captured in something called a journey map. And the way that we're able to create a journey map that includes the moments that matter is through focus groups and interviews and other discussions with program managers who oversee customer experience or who oversee programs and services in the VA, as well as program participants. And So we discussed with those potential new government agencies looking to set up those systems, how we do the qualitative piece and how we leverage those insights to start creating surveys and other measurement tools to start gauging in real time actual tactical insights from veterans, in our case, on how those programs and services are operating in real time. So the executive order really underscored how critical it is to not only deliver programs and services, but understand the customer experience of those programs and services. So that's the direction that I've seen and my whole unit has seen in the VA as a result of that executive order. And I'll also mention, just parenthetically, you asked about employee experience. That is a key component because we, as a result of the executive order, have recently stood up an employee experience directorate in combination with my unit, which is the Enterprise Measurement and Design Directorate. And that allows us to compare and contrast employee experience of those delivering services with the corresponding customer experience of those receiving those programs and services.
Well,
and at times there's a disconnect, and then we need to understand why that is. Why is there a lack of alignment between those who are maybe super excited and motivated about providing the services, but yet corresponding, in our case, patients or other veterans receiving the services who are not expressing high levels of satisfaction?
That's fascinating. Yeah, because often they're like, you're right, it's disconnect. You mentioned journey maps, and I find them fascinating because they can be so, and we wrote about this in one of our recent GovLoop guides, they can be so complex and detailed, but they really are impressive how they track, your experience through one specific service or journey, to get from point A to point B. So that's great. I saw, Matt, you were nodding your head initially. Is there something, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there something that you wanted to add, or do you just entirely agree with Evan?
I love the points. I do have a couple of points in terms of accessibility. One of the, making sure that citizens have full Section 508 sort of ability to read screens with screen readers. These are all the pieces of technology that make up your website need to support these things in order to make this technology accessible to all users, and no one gets left behind. And same thing with authenticators for in terms of Okta provided technology, giving people options for providing multi-factor authentication when they don't necessarily smartphone, because that's just not universal, and making things simpler, leveraging login.gov through GSA, where citizens can use their own credentials that they may have already created with login.gov, and giving agencies the ability to quickly onboard with that identity provider service to make it easy for their consumers.
That's great. We actually had a few questions that have come in that are directly relevant to some of this, so I just want to ask them. And any of you can respond. What other tools of measurement beyond surveying would you recommend? In this electronic age when surveys are so prolific and survey fatigue is real, what is the go-to tool or methodology?
Well, again, qualitative research, as I referenced, is sometimes all that's needed. Especially if a certain experience does not lend itself to surveys. For example, groups have approached us for requests to have surveys for veterans who are in the final stages of their life cycle. And, in that precarious situation, in that sensitive situation, it may not be appropriate to send out surveys, but yet you could have qualitative focus groups and interviews with caregivers providing for veterans in that situation. So in our case, when we create a journey map that includes moments that matter, and again, the journey map is created after conducting focus groups and interviews, there is an end product to that, even though it's not a survey or survey synopsis. It's an insights report that has recommendations and perspectives and suggestions for follow-up action items as a result of that qualitative research. So that's another pathway if there is survey fatigue, or if a certain scenario does not lend itself to maybe a survey outreach process.
That's great. Thanks. Ben, I'll shoot you the next question. What are some of the biggest CX implementation pain points that you're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, there's several. I think one of the bigger ones, though, it really is kind of the access to the technology that you see in the private sector oftentimes, right? So I think we do a lot of comparisons sometimes that, we should be, it should be as easy to get my passport as it is to get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Well, sounds great, right? But it's always not quite that simple when you think of all the compliance and security constraints, as well as the budgeting constraints that the government's seeing. So I do think that sometimes that piece of it really does lend itself to kind of really pushing the government back a bit in terms of what they can and can't do from a digital transformation perspective, which obviously really leads to that CX and experience piece. So I think that's one of the big ones. And then, if you look at it kind of even broader, I think sometimes we get caught up in the technology deployment so much that we forget about, number one, the beginning of that journey, like we talked about, like what are we really looking to accomplish? But then also that launch or that go live of that particular experience for a citizen or customer is just the beginning. It's an evolution, and it's really the start of what you're going to look at, from a long-term success. So being agile and iterative is really key to creating that overall experience, because you're definitely not going to get it right the first time. And I think sometimes without that agile mindset, it kind of leads us to say, hey, we checked the box and, we're kind of completed at go live. So I'd say those are two of the things that we often see that become a challenge in these endeavors.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is there anything so I guess you're kind of talking about the idea of sort of fail forward, like try, like you're never going to get it right the first time, entirely the first time, but it's a constant ongoing process. Any Matt or Evan, any comments? I don't want to move on to the next question without giving you an opportunity to say something else.
I see
sometimes the customer experience effectiveness can be looked at from an operational perspective. If veterans are, for example, in our case, expressing dissatisfaction with the disability claims application process, and they're not sure whether they have the correct information or knowledge or comfort level in applying for, successive levels of the application process, you could look to see if operational enhancements were made in the literature, materials, information, knowledge sharing of how to apply for a disability claims, rating. You could look in successive quarters of the year, or over a certain time span to see if the proportion of those applying for benefits, using those successive appeals stages has improved. In other words, what were improvements made based on initial feedback, and can you tell based on, the operational data in terms of, to use my example, proportion of total initial claimants who submitted a, supplemental claim application, for example. If that has significantly improved from timeframe A to timeframe B, and for sure that there were some operational enhancements made based on initial feedback, indicating that the information was faulty or incomplete, or not as helpful as could have been, you can make inferences that that has the subsequent proportion of those applying for supplemental benefits may have been enhanced as a result of quality improvement efforts that were made based on the initial feedback. So there are a lot of different ways that you can measure customer experience, and some of it is operational. If you can use tools available to you based on operational databases, in addition to customer experience surveys and qualitative research.
So tying in with the technology thing, just sort of building on that, is getting staff acclimated to using new technology that would improve customer experience, is that a problem? Because a lot of times, people know that technology will help out to do, one thing or another, or they should do it, but it can be difficult to get used to. So is the technology piece or what's involved a problem from a staffing perspective? I'm not sure that question was entirely coherent, but but I guess, Ben, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. I mean, trying to make it easy for the employee to serve the
Yes, that was what I
customer
meant. Thank you.
is the key, right? And
I was
so
an English major, by the way. So, okay.
no, but I think that's oftentimes forgotten, right? Because we always jump right to the end game, and really it starts with making sure that the employees have what they need so that they can quickly and efficiently serve the customer, the citizen. So yeah, I think 100% that's part of it. There's always a resistance to change, and then getting that initial implementation of the supporting system is really critical. So, looking at something that's easy to implement and configurable, something that can evolve with the program is super, super important. And then obviously the training and change management that comes along with that, because there is a mindset to all of this, right? That customer first mindset is not necessarily something that's always been within the confines of government. And so I think that's changing. I think we talked a little bit about the EO and how that's really pushed things forward. And we're seeing, these customer experience offices coming up in government, which is so great to see. But yeah, I mean, getting it right for the employee to better serve the citizen is 100% a big part of this and the foundational element.
So the specific steps, if you were to offer specific steps to enhance CX agencies or an organization's CX strategy, what kind of steps would you specifically offer?
Yeah, I think it's, starting with a lot of what's been discussed around just understanding your customer base and really what do they need. So you kind of start there, that the whole concept of journey map, does it cross over agencies? Do we have to have cross collaboration? I mean, and then really bringing together all of the different groups that will support the effort. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges when you think of just when the way programs have traditionally been managed. It's oftentimes in more of that kind of waterfall approach of these are the steps that we're going to take to get to the end product. Well, it kind of needs to be a lot more iterative, and you need to bring in the different voices and have those collaboration efforts earlier on, because there are so many different touch points to a lot of these different journeys. And then once you've got that mapped out and you really understand kind of what the program looks like, then really looking at that foundational technology. I think so many times we start with the technology and try to fit the program into it, and it really should be the other way around, where understanding the basics of the program and then bringing in the proper technology to support that and enable it, because technology won't change anything if there isn't a good change management and programmatic effort in place.
Yeah, we talk about people, process, and technology, and how everything starts with the people part. So your point is well taken. Just switching gears a little bit and talking about privacy, which is a huge consideration now. Like I said before, so much data is out there, but who's in control of it, who owns it? So how can you increase accessibility as far as customer experience, which we've talked about and you obviously want to do, but while still protecting people's privacy? Because some people, can have concerns on that. Anyone want to jump in, or I can, Evan, is there anything that you've seen with the VA as far as, privacy concerns?
For us, it sort of boils down to our ethos is that we collect and organize and make available data for component units within the Department of Veterans Affairs. Our philosophy is that those units should be responsible for identifying who should or should not have access to that data. And we don't disseminate it to others beyond the purview of whom they have identified as being appropriate individuals or groups to have access. That's number one. Number two, we have a system in which the Office of Management and Budget allows us to submit and be approved for surveys in a expedited, pretty painless approach of submitting a small package of information, a survey wireframe, a short questionnaire about what the objective is of the survey and who's being surveyed and what the parameters are of the survey. But the deal is that they're able to approve us very quickly. And every survey that we submit through our governmental process must be approved by OMB, Office of Management and Budget. But the parameters are that the data is supposed to be used for internal quality and systems improvement and internal analysis so that the VA can get better and understand what the pain points are and what is working well and not working well. And the results are not supposed to be and cannot be shared externally without very strict guidelines in place and without prior approval from the Office of Management and Budget. So we do publish some of our results on performance.gov, such as our outpatient survey results. But people come to us all the time and ask if they can share V-Signal's results in scholarly journals or in professional presentations at conferences or what have you. And the answer is usually no. The results are supposed to be used for those agencies, and really that protects the privacy of, the respondents who are submitting survey responses individually. And, when we aggregate them on a group basis, on an aggregate basis, for purposes of them providing input to us that allows their individual site location to get better. And I think it would be abrogating our trust with them if those results were to be published externally, because that's not why our veterans are submitting surveys. They're submitting surveys so that we can get better. And so, for all those reasons, we have very strict guardrails and parameters that limit the extent to which results can be shared externally. And by so doing, we're able to preserve the anonymity and privacy of our respondents.
Right. We just had a question come in. Somebody wants to know if customer experience has changed during the COVID pandemic, if the pandemic has suddenly changed people's interpretation of CX. You're all three of you seem like you're really thinking. Let's see, Matt, do you want to?
I think that, there's more online interaction, obviously, due to COVID, and consumers have sharpened their expectations around how privacy is treated. And there's definitely a trade-off between personalization and convenience and privacy. I think one of the key things to balance that is to give them more control over how their data is being managed. And with identity, we have ways to provision user data across all these different applications and systems through open standards like SCIM, giving a user the ability to be forgotten, for instance, or have their data removed from a system. You have to know where that data resides. So having that capability to remove that data from those external systems is key to achieving that privacy. I think a lot of the things that happened during COVID, with other breaches and other concerns, I think were probably a bigger factor, honestly.
Yeah. I think during I think in general, the other day I was ordering a bunch of stuff, and it occurred to me how much of my personal information was online in so many places at once. And it's supposed to be protected by everywhere. And it's not all just government, but it is kind of a little daunting when you think about how much of your personal stuff is actually out there. And certainly during the pandemic, when everybody was, for a really long time, just staying in and ordering stuff and using agents, going to the DMV online. The DMV always gets a bad rap, but going to the DMV online, every transaction that used to be in person suddenly couldn't be. So Ben, I'm just curious, what do you expect to see in the CX world in the next year or so? Like crystal ball kind of thing. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, we could go to the obvious one and talk about AI, right? I think that's a big one that it's going to be really interesting.
A little bit.
Yeah, there's been a couple mentions of it, but it'll be really interesting to see how we can embrace it in government. And Obviously OMB just issued, they're going to issue some guidance and some regulation around it, which makes total sense. I mean, huge power, it's undeniable, and the power is infinite, but it does also bring a lot of responsibility and perceived risk. But I do think there's so many places, especially from a CX perspective, that it could be hugely beneficial. And then I think the personalization, like we just talked about, is going to continue to be something that's really put at the forefront. Being able to serve things up as opposed to having people go look for them is, I think, a key. And then this continuous movement towards being more agile and being more iterative in the process, right? So again, not looking at the implementation or the go live of a particular project as the end game. And then that should bring with it, I think, better collaboration across all. But I mean, those are a couple of the things that we're starting to see that the government's embracing that we may have seen maybe on private sector side a little earlier. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. It'll be fun to watch.
So does that mean there are going to be probably more on government sites, more chat bots that pop up asking for your help or for live conversations and all that kind of stuff, which aren't really live conversations because they're with, a machine or something?
Yeah.
Is that more likely to happen?
I think there will be a lot more of that. I mean, and that can be controlled too, because some of those aren't necessarily AI. They're more kind of scripted, right? So if this question comes up, and those are hugely valuable, again, to just serve the information up in real time and not have someone have to go look or wait for a response. And then that's hugely valuable for the agency as well, to not have to have that ticket issued, right? Ticket deflection is a key metric in a lot of this from a customer experience perspective. So, but yeah, and I think you'll start to see those get smarter though. That's the thing that'll be increasingly interesting to watch. And then really how much of that can government embrace, in terms of the confines of privacy and some of the other restrictions that there might be from a security standpoint.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Matt, do you have anything to add to that as far as any, your crystal ball thoughts?
I see that there's going to be a merging of digital and in-person experiences, and that's, I think, part of the answer of the question around the fear of technology that was posted in the chat. Giving people the ability to come to offices in person with a printout, with a QR code to scan to make unemployment requests. And Department of Labor is doing that. Has a pilot program with that using U.S. Postal Service type facilities. So it's I see a merging of some old school retro approaches with newer digital tech.
Yeah. Anything, Evan? And we actually we got a question a couple minutes ago about the surveys that you were referring to, and someone wants to know if there's an option for making live changes. So if somebody is getting, you're getting a survey response that's indicating some kind of problem, is there an opportunity to correct it more immediately than as opposed to waiting a little bit and going back?
To correct the problem being expressed in the survey?
Yeah, yeah. Is there?
Well, I'll give one example of that. We were talking about modern technology. We have algorithms that can flag, for example, themes and topics and keywords related to, in our case, maybe a veteran who might be under acute distress or, feeling anxious or depressed or maybe at risk for self-harm. And all of those situations, all the free text that relate to those scenarios are immediately, without delay, routed automatically via a crisis alert algorithm to our Veterans Crisis Line. And we have a similar one for the National Center for Homeless Veterans, and actually another one for veterans who might be indicating situations of military sexual trauma or sexual assault, or experiences that they had in their healthcare visit that may have triggered previous instances of sexual harassment or assault. So response and immediate actionable addressing of input can happen immediately. There is no delay. And I'll just give one very, very quick example. Also, we have a system in our outpatient surveys in which we immediately, based on an algorithm that captures whether a response is actionable, whether there's something in the feedback about a certain healthcare experience or benefits experience that expresses that a veteran wants something or needs something or is asking about something tangible or specific, it immediately transfers that comment from our vSignal system to a case management tracking system for immediate routing and follow-up. So all the comments that come in, if there's something that requires immediate action, there is no delay, and they're immediately routed appropriately and case managed appropriately.
No, that's so important. That's really great to know. We actually have another question that came in too. How do you balance the need for innovation and technology with the quote unquote technophobic members of different generations? Is there a...
Yeah, that's a challenge for us, because I'll just give an example of that. We've been trying recently to address the younger veterans by, instead of sending them email-based surveys, to send them text-based surveys. But we run into challenges with that. Not every idea to try to adapt to the technological needs and desires of different age cohorts, for example, is feasible. There are rules. We didn't know this until we looked into this, that in order to send someone a SMS text, whether that's for a survey or any kind of outreach or inquiry, requires their advanced approval. And we don't really have a system to ask a veteran in advance, would you be okay to receive surveys via text? And so we're not able to do that right now until we figure that out. But so sometimes technology is available, is what I would say, but it's not always able to be immediately implemented, given some programmatic or systemic challenges that need to be worked out, or privacy-related concerns.
I didn't realize that you had to do that. I mean, I think like most of us, I've gotten text messages like to make sure that you opt in and stuff, but I didn't realize that was required. So last question, I guess, Ben, and I'll just go to you. What do you want attendees to walk away from this session knowing? What takeaway do you want them to have? And then Evan and Matt, you can chime in too also.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's not easy, right? I mean, everything y'all are doing it's not simple. And I think there's been great strides made, especially since the pandemic. But the other thing too for me is this is a team sport, and I think we have to get better at breaking down the silos within government, both within an agency and cross agency, to bring best practices, really kind of complete the journey and have that seamless kind of shift from one stage to the next, as well as what we just talked about. I should be able to go into a state or into a federal agency office and get something done, and then that automatically update anything I might do online, as opposed to me having to go back in and kind of re-enter that type of information. So bringing all that together, and then lastly, the technology piece is an enabler for all of it. Obviously at Lessing, we do a lot of that, but we got to get the program right first, and then bring the technology in on the tail end.
Right. Evan, Matt, do you have any final thoughts? Like what you would like what final message you'd like to leave with our audience today?
For me, the big thing, go ahead, please. Go ahead. I'll go after you.
All right, awesome. I would say don't assume you know your customers. And if you don't have visibility into how they're interacting with your services across all channels, web, phone, surveys, et cetera, invest and get that visibility. Utilize A/B testing to measure the effect of changes in smaller populations, and use that as a mechanism for determining whether you're improving a customer experience. And finally, avoid survivor bias, and track who's churning, out of your site for whatever reason. Don't over index on the people that are interacting with your site all the time. There may be a population that has already, given up on you due to prior bad experience.
Yeah. It's like statistics you see sometimes about unemployment or whatever. And it can just mean that people have stopped looking for jobs, is essentially what you're saying, sort of. Evan, you looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah. Customer experience, information, and trends need context. The more data you can layer on, the more additional information you can layer on to the information you already have, the better. To give you an example, if in our case, healthcare patients are saying, I did not get my appointment at a day and time that worked for me. What else do we know about that patient from other listening tools that we may have for him or her? Do we have their preferences logged somewhere in terms of where and when and how they would like to receive their health care? Without knowing that, we don't have any context to know how to interpret their customer experience reply to, I got my appointment at a day and time that worked for me. So context is very important. Additional information is very important. And, just to give another example of the use case that I referenced, when someone says, I got my appointment at a day and time that worked for me, or perhaps did not, well, how long was their wait time to get an appointment? And how does that wait time differ from the benchmark that that location has set? What is an acceptable amount of time to receive an appointment? And how does John Smith's wait time to receive an appointment differ from anyone else receiving appointments or scheduling appointments at the same location for the same type of service? Without this context, it's very difficult to tell the story of what truly is meaningful. And I feel that the more data you can layer on, the more context you can layer on, the more you're able to explain to leadership who are reviewing these results what the results truly mean. Otherwise, it's just data on customer experience, but it's not data that's interpretable and meaningful and actionable. Data needs to be actionable from a customer experience perspective in order to make quality and systems improvement. Otherwise, it just may be one person's opinion and it doesn't really represent a trend. So, sometimes, we get accused of having too many tabs and filters and analytic capabilities, but it all is for the purpose of either triangulating different listening tools that we have available to be able to tell the story from different vantage points, or it's to provide ability to do more interpretive analysis, to know about trends and themes and emerging concerns, that express really what whole groups of people are thinking and feeling, not just certain individuals. So context is critical.
Yeah, data is two-dimensional until you actually do something with it and explain it. I just looked at the clock, and unfortunately, we're actually over time. So I want to thank you so much for participating, for sharing your insights. I want to remind everybody that we have great resources available for you to download, so please be sure to do that. And to also check your inbox again tomorrow, because we're going to send you a link so you can watch this entire session on demand. And I want to thank Okta, Carasoft, and Atlassian for their support of this session, and thank everybody participating. We appreciate all that you do every day. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.